right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Aparo's Nonprofit Bites and Insights. Again, these are our webinar series that are free for nonprofit professionals. We have topics tailored specifically around nonprofit work. Today is our second part of a two-part series around strengthening development operations for nonprofits. If you were unable to join us for the first session, no worries. I will be sending up a follow-up email. It'll include a recording for both sessions, so you'll have a chance to review the first session if you missed it. We have the lovely Whitney joining us again to lead the second part. Before I turn it over to her, a few housekeeping items. I will be recording this session, and this session will be shared. Again, that follow-up email, it'll give you the direct link to the recording, so you don't need to go searching for it. We'll also have the slide decks and any other resources we might talk about today. Q&A and chat box are available for you to use. Feel free to use either. We will be monitoring both. And really quickly, for those of you who are new to Aparo, we are a nonprofit ourselves. We're based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And essentially what we do is we help other nonprofits with any of their technology needs and challenges. We do offer a wide range of services to help support nonprofits. The one I want to talk about today is around our community impact projects because we're going to be talking about donor database. And so if any of you have gone searching for any sort of database, any sort of CRM, you know there's so much out there. So one of our most popular projects is software selection. So if you are in a space where you're either want to transition to another software or are looking for a software, we can connect you with a team of volunteers to go through your wants and needs and help make sure that you're selecting the tool that is right for your nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more, best way is go to our website at apar.org, or again, you can email me. You can hit reply to that follow-up email, and I'll be happy to support you and answer any of your questions. Well, that is it for me. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and go ahead and turn it over to Whitney. You're on mute.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Yanting. Thank you so much, everyone, and Yanting for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate you guys taking some time on this Thursday afternoon to come learn more about one of the funnest topics on earth, development operations. I think it really is a testament to everyone on this call today, how much, you really care about your work, you care about your professional growth, and don't take that lightly and don't take it for granted. So when you are ready to go and ask for that raise, make sure that this is one of your bullet items on that presentation. So I would love to start off by saying thank you to Aparo for having me. This has been gosh, Linting, I think we started working on this series late last fall. It had to be after Thanksgiving last year.
It's been a
It's
while.
been a while, and and I got to tell you, the days go by super, super fast. They go by
Mhm.
so fast. Um, so a little bit about our firm. We work with nonprofits of all sizes, but our focus really is on small to medium-sized nonprofits, typically with a budget between 250K and 5 million. That is where most of our clients fall. And we focus on the areas of expertise you see below, with a particular focus on development and fundraising. And while we do work in all of these other areas, our focus is really about connecting the dots for organizations so that they can eventually boost their revenue generation. So everything that we do leads back to fundraising, whether if it's board training, whether if it's systems alignment and operations, marketing and communication. Nonprofits are a business, right? So at the end of the day, we have to make sure that everything that we're doing is helping our business goals. For those of you who asked after last class, thank you. Several of you joined the waiting list last week, Thursday, for the Fundraising with Confidence course. Registration is officially open today, and I'll have the slide again at the end of the presentation. It is limited only to 40 seats, so feel free to get some more information by scanning the QR code. I wanted to note that registration for this class is a two-part process, so you'll fill out your Google form, and before you hit submit, you'll need to click on the link to process your registration fee via Stripe. So if you're interested in learning more about it, please scan the QR code. All the information and the breakdown for what we'll be learning over the course of the 2-day class is through this QR code. So let's do a quick review for those of you who were on the call or on the in the class last week, who attended this workshop, but mostly for those of you who were not able to attend. So what did we cover last week? We focused on really 4 core areas: components of operations, the best practices, the critical elements for effective donor comms, and the basics of operational alignment. So today's session, you'll kind of hear some similar language, right? Last week's session, we sort of stayed a little bit more high level. We dug a little bit deep into some areas, but today we're really doing a deep dive into the different areas that we touched on last week, with more of a focus towards the donor relationship and the nuanced particulars that are needed in order to run an effective development department. And what does that look like? When we think about development, how are we really viewing it as a larger part of the organizational or nonprofit picture that you're a part of? So we went over the definition for development ops, right? It's the set of processes that support your development revenue generation functions. And Yenting, we can send this slide deck out as well afterwards. So don't worry too much about taking a bunch of notes, and you'll also be getting a recording. And we focused on the what, the how, and the when, versus on focusing on the actual positionality of the role that we're talking about. Because when we do that and we focus on the person's position, we tend to really get into and think about, right, the person that's in the role right now. Well, this is not working, so we're pointing fingers and we're thinking about it more as a siloed function versus something that needs to be institutionalized, right? Versus something that is important enough for your organization that no matter who sits in that seat, we all need to know what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and when it needs to be done. Now, we're not, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about collaborating to the point where it becomes ineffective, that everyone has to know every intricacy about everyone's job, right? That would just be ineffective. But we need to know enough so that we're operating at a high level. And we need to know enough so that when someone steps out, resigns, is terminated, or there are shifts that happens, layoffs, we need to know enough to keep the organization running as smoothly as possible. It'll never be ideal or perfect, but we can arm ourselves with the tools and resources that we need to make sure that we're functioning adequately for the folks that we're serving. So institutionalizing your operations, we went over this, and it really is about what I mentioned before, just making sure that the process is about the institution, it's customized to your mission, and it's not about the person in that role. And I think a really common example that we can all relate to is, right, somebody comes into, let's use development, since this is a development workshop. Someone comes into a development role and they're leading the team. They do things, they're going to have their own set of rules and processes that they're comfortable with, their own way of putting donor information into the donor data. Maybe they were trained at another organization. But operations and institutionalizing your operations is really about making sure when that person leaves, that there isn't a huge gap to be filled. There's always going to be a gap, but you don't want the gap to be, oh, well, how did they do this? These are things that should be documented. These are processes that your team should be aligned on, your departments and your organization should be aligned on. It's important. It's important for the livelihood of your organization. And while we often focus on programming and bringing in money and programming and bringing in money, right? We have to also pay attention to the systems that allow us to program and bring in the dollars. Because once those systems fail, your programs, your donor stewardship, all those things will also trickle behind. And we don't want that. We want to be successful in the work that we're doing. We talked about making sure your process is customized, making sure it's consistent, making sure it's effective. And in order to know if it's effective, there has to be and evaluation piece within that process. So as you're building your plans for operational excellence, and this is something we're going to be talking about in the class that we're doing in June, as you're building your plan for operational excellence, make sure evaluation is a part of your strategy. It shouldn't be an afterthought, okay? So let's jump into the deep dives for today. Okay. We're still going to be talking about the data management piece, the donor communications piece, and the organizational alignment piece, just like we did last week. However, again, we're going to be looking at some very particular things that you can grab, take away, and some of them you can even implement immediately. So, building a data operations plan. We looked at this slide last week also. One of the things that we want to make sure we're doing when we're building any plan, not just data operations, is that we're answering the right questions. You don't want to build a plan based on the wrong questions, right? And really distilling down what you need in order to make that plan effective. I mean, we could list 10, 20, 30 questions, but is that effective? And are you ever going to go back to that, right? I equate that with spending 6 to 12 months building a strategic plan, right? For a nonprofit with a staff of 7. It's beautiful, it sits on the shelf, and we never go back to it. We never go back to it until a grant asks, oh, can you upload your strategic plan as an attachment? Then we go and attach it, right? And it doesn't really drive our work. We might remember some of the key things in there, but it's not really driving our day-to-day work and operations. And this piece is going to be critically important when we get to the team alignment portion in a few moments here. So the data management, let's just dig down into the tangibles, okay? The things that really need to be done daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and we can keep going, right? Biannually, annual. I mean, we can just keep going down the line, but let's focus on the basics for today. We only have so much time. Uh, so entering your donations, right? Making sure for those of you who did receive the one sheeter database comparison sheet last week, Yenting, thank you so much for sending that out again. Making sure that you have a system that allows you to do most of these things. Again, I say most because some of you may not be in a place where you really need to track event attendance. Maybe you don't have events, right? Maybe you're only focused on the programmatic aspect of your mission for the first 3 to 5 years. Maybe. So you want to have a database that is, again, the key here is, let me go back to the slide, that is customizable for your mission based on where you are in your organization's life cycle. Okay. There are plenty of databases out there with all of the bells and whistles, but do you need them? Do you need all those bells and whistles is the question. Don't get something so complicated that it hinders your team's performance rather than enables your team's performance. So with some of the obvious things, you have to be able to enter donations, okay? Updating contact info and making sure that your database can not only do this, but that team members are aware of how to do these processes as well, okay? And last week we talked about, is it every team member? No, we don't need 45 logins in the database, right? That is just a recipe for disaster. But you want to make sure that folks who need to be involved have the appropriate tier of access to the database so that they can do what they need to do in the system, okay, effectively. So recording interactions. Now that's a huge one because oftentimes what I see with our clients is they have a database, they just may not be using it effectively. And one of the ways is not recording donor interactions, not recording the coffees, the lunches, and the dinners. And mind you, that doesn't need to be done for every single donor, right? Because I hope you're not having coffee, lunch, and dinner with every single donor. I don't think that's even possible. But recording, even if it were inviting a donor to a program, or inviting a donor to come and volunteer, making sure that you have the capability to record those interactions in your database. And secondly, and almost as important, making sure that you're able to pull a report on your donor interactions. It does no good if you can put it in there look at it record by record, but you can't pull a report to inform your work and look at the big picture behind how your interactions are going and flowing. Okay. Making sure you're able to include your acknowledgement letters in the database is also a very important key feature um, of what I would call an effective database. Okay. And not just, and I'll use Neon as an example, which is why I've landed on Neon for so many different nonprofits. And even when I was in the space a couple of times as well, is it allows you to upload your donor acknowledgement letters by donor individually. Now, we didn't use the functionality in that way, but what we decided to do for one of the nonprofits I worked at, just because we had a tiny team and it wasn't the most time effective, what we would do is upload our donor acknowledgement letters as one file, just as one file. We would title it with the date, exactly what the thank you was for, or the letter was for. Was it stewardship? Was it for an annual campaign? So that way we could always go back to that file and see who got a letter, if they got it. You know, someone calls and says, "Oh, I never got my renewal," whatever it is. But make sure that you have a system that will allow you to track your letters and upload your letters. Importing online donations, of course, right? Now, a lot of the smaller donor databases have very limited functionality with integration of online donations. So make sure that whatever system you get does integrate with your other key systems. So if you're using QuickBooks for accounting, for example, as most nonprofits do, make sure that the integration with this new database you're looking at is smooth, and make sure it's seamless. Make sure you're getting the information that you need. Okay, make sure there are no limitations there. We have tracking event attendance, managing recurring gifts, running data backups, review tasks and follow-ups, and most of our databases have that. But these are the things as development professionals we should be doing on a daily basis, right? We should be looking at these things. Our team should be trained to do these things. Let's move to weekly. Weekly data operations. What are some of the things we need to be looking at weekly? Checking for duplicates, verifying data accuracy, right? Updating your mailing list, which is a big one because oftentimes we don't update that email list until it's time to do a mail merge and mail the letters out, if some of you are still doing mail merges, right? Generating reports, reviewing outstanding pledges, cleaning up the data errors. I want to go to generating reports for a moment because oftentimes when we think about generating a report, we do it out of reactivity or we do it out of need. This report generation piece, when we speak to clients about that, it really is about being able to see the big picture of how the data is coming out because you only get out what you're putting in. So when you are generating reports from that database, you're able to see if there's 100 donors, for example, let's say, on the query that you run, you download the report, you're able to see trends and you're able to see errors in maybe how we're putting in the mailing address. You're able to see, oh, wait a minute, user A is recording birthdays, but user B is not. No wonder why these donors' birthdays didn't pull out. So we're able to have now team conversations about consistency and how important it is to keep the consistency going across how we're across our teams in terms of how we're putting in our data. And let me say this, if you are big enough to have a operations team member for your nonprofit, it is so critical to not put every single data need on that person. I can't emphasize training enough for your teams. Empower that individual to be the one to lead that training and potentially to invest in your data, your donor database companies, learning hubs, to invest in their training modules that they may have and workshops they may be offering. It could save a ton of time and a lot of future headaches. Okay, when you're not relying on one person to do every single thing in the database. So monthly data operations. What are we doing monthly? We're reconciling donations with accounting. This one's a big one. This one's a big one because often what we see is, especially again, this is not a finger point. This is a, hey, we have capacity issues. I couldn't get to this because I had 10 programs to run. We have a team of four, or I'm running everything alone. There are so many reasons, right? The purpose of this workshop is really to help you overcome some of those reasons or see how we can shift our thinking or maybe even shift how we're operating, what we can get rid of, what we need to focus on in order to be in better alignment within your own role, but also across departments and organization within the organization, right? So reconciling donations with accounting, this is a service that we've provided in the past with clients that we've worked with. We pull out their reports, we work with their accounting teams to reconcile monthly. But what we've seen and where the bottleneck typically happens is that if an organization is set to reconcile on the fourth, let's just say on the fourth of every month with accounting, they're waiting until the fourth to pull out that report, send it to accounting, and then accounting comes back, right? And has all these missing donors, all these missing checks. And so what you want to do is stay on top of it weekly. So by the time it gets to accounting, you'll always have a couple of mistakes or a couple of things missing or areas of clarity that are needed. But oftentimes what happens is that, right? You send the report and now you're trying to figure everything out. It is the fourth. The board meeting's on the 15th. Now it's taken 2 weeks. Now you're stressing, you have anxiety because the report's not accurate. Board meeting's 2 days away. Oh, you finally got it. But we don't have to have that amount of stress when it comes to these processes and systems. We can always try our best to work ahead. We can always try, right? We can always move and shift some things. That's the hardest part to do is to move and shift that mindset around what is it that is actually important right this second. I've been there, guys. I get it. I've been right in almost all of your shoes, and have held almost every position in nonprofit. So I totally understand how hard it is to do that. Okay. So reviewing your lapsed donors, quite frankly, I try not to be redundant here, but reviewing lapsed donors is something that I would recommend doing daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. Okay. Now I put it here on the monthly because that's kind of the most general, right, process exception. However, you only do it monthly if everyone else has already renewed, right? If everyone else has already renewed, then you're fine. You can do it monthly. But we all know that's not the case, right? And the best case scenario for us as nonprofits is we have a 40 to 45% retention rate. So reviewing your lapsed donors is something you want to do weekly, okay, if not daily. So analyzing giving trends, again, pulling out those reports to see who's giving, when, are the numbers accurate, removing inactive contacts. Now, I get this question a lot. What is the difference? Like, why doesn't it say, remove lapsed contacts? And what is the difference really between lapsed and inactive? So here's what I share with folks, and hopefully you don't hear it different anywhere else. An inactive donor is someone who has not given, right? They missed one donation. They missed 1 year of giving. They just didn't renew their gift. Maybe they need a reminder, they need a letter, they need that phone call, a handwritten note, or they just forgot, right? The lapsed donor is more than a year. This person hasn't given in 2 years or 3 or 4 or 5, right? And then we get into our SIBUNs versus LIBUNs. We won't, focus on that too much today. But your inactive donors are more close, have been in engagement within the last 12 months with your nonprofit. Okay, let's move on here. Gosh, I feel like this could be a workshop by itself. We only have 34 minutes left. So the quarterly data operations, auditing your data integrity. Oh, this is a big one. This is a huge one. If you are more than a year old as a nonprofit and your budget is 500, between 500 and a million, and you've already had an annual audit, right? You want to make sure, and I always advise, it depends on the number of donors you have. Because if you're small, you have 25 donors, it might be okay, doing this maybe twice a year. But for our large, if you have, I'll say maybe 100 donors or more, as a nonprofit, you should be doing a mock audit just internally. Look at the audit from last year. Take a look at some of the samples they asked for, the different types of receipts. Take a look at which board pledge forms they might have asked for, donor pledge forms with signatures. This is a good opportunity, guys, only to take an hour or 90 minutes just to audit what you already have for the year. If you do it quarterly, by the time the audit comes, you're not pulling your hair out, right? Or faking a sickness because you can't make it on that Monday because it's just such a nightmare. Again, I have been there, okay? So if you do it quarterly, you have the opportunity to stay on top of those things. I read a quote, and I can't remember what book it was, that said you have to treat your donor database like one of your top donors and check in regularly. Okay. And I never forgot that. So updating your database policies. This is a huge one. If you are the person in charge of your database and you're on this call, you're probably the one who gets the emails, right? From your database company saying, here's a new update, you need to download this, or we're switching something, or this form's going to look different, or download this plugin. Our APIs have new. I mean, there's a ton of things that come up throughout the year, right? So make sure that those changes don't have any implications for what your recorded and documented database operations policies are. Okay. Performing your database cleanup, reviewing data security, assessing database needs. Overall, nonprofits outgrow their database needs all the time. So at some point, we're going to have to sit around the table and ask, are we outgrowing this database? Or is this database way too much for our needs because it is a pain in the neck getting people to log on here to do what they need to do, right? So evaluating annually or quarterly or twice a year, again, depending on your size, okay, what your database needs are. I love a database that allows me to enter my grant contracts. You go into the donor file, you upload the contract, Neon, oh gosh, I hate to say it, Salesforce, and Salesforce were great for that. Um, but it's one of those, it was kind of like IKEA, I used so many databases before until I had the opportunity to be able to upload a grant contract. And again, this is 7 or 8 years ago. I didn't know I needed it. And so from that moment on, every donor database I either implemented for an organization or I personally worked with or implemented needed to have that feature to be able to upload grant contracts. Pledge forms, the one right before that is another big one. I'll be honest, when I was in the space, in the nonprofit space, and I still am, but when I was a actual nonprofit employee, this piece always got me, the pledge forms. Okay. When I worked in small teams, and the audit came around and they asked for a pledge form from donor XYZ, we had the pledge form. It's just donor XYZ never really signed it, but we're getting their payments. But that doesn't matter. They need to have the signed pledge forms. So make sure that your pledges, because some of those pledges are long term, it's easy to get things messed up, right? It's easy to lose files in the process of a 5-year pledge. God forbid you've changed teams or team members several times. So make sure that your pledge forms are accurate, they're up to date, and they're uploaded. A couple of reminders. This might look familiar to those of you who attended last week. For data operations, Excel is not a donor CRM. Do not use Excel as a donor CRM. If you're just starting off, you have 25 donors and you're just kind of figuring things out, fine. But as quickly as possible, switch over to a CRM that is optimized and secure because you want to make sure that you you are not causing a liability for your donor data. So you want to make sure that you have those things in place. No matter the size of your organization, if you're working with one person or 62, or if you're the only one, doesn't matter. What gets measured gets done, okay? And your operations can be effective for you. That's where the customization comes in. And we'll do a lot of customizing and actually creating some of these operations plans during our class in June. Training is critical for all departments who will be using the database. I said that probably 10 times in the last half hour. Training is critical. It is critical. And if you are a department leader, development leader, or nonprofit leader on this call today, I encourage you to provide and invest in the training that your team needs to make sure that that database is being used optimally. Any questions before we move on to donor communications? And please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. If we don't get to all of them by the end of this session, we'll definitely get to them afterwards. All right, so let's keep going. Let's keep going. Donor communications. Ooh, this one's a fun one. Donor communications is a fun one. Can you recommend good CRMs? Paola, thank you so much for that question. We can reattach, Paola, the one-sheeter that I shared last week. Yenting, if we could maybe reattach that to the post email, that would be great. And Paola, you can get it from
Absolutely.
there.
Yep.
Thank you. Awesome. You're welcome, Paola. So donor data and communications, the donor life cycle. We don't typically think of data and then go to the donor life cycle. But let me tell you, the most effective way to track your donor data is to make sure that what you're tracking is moving along with the donor life cycle and where your donors are in that life cycle. Okay. That was a mouthful. What does that mean? How do you do that? Well, that's a whole separate class. But I will say this. Make sure that you have the opportunity in your database to create customized fields. At the very least, you can create customized fields that will allow you to say, oh, well, you know what? I had a coffee with Yenting and she is super passionate about K-12 education. She's qualified. Now I can go into my database and select from a drop-down menu that Yenting is in the qualifying phase. Now, when you're shopping for that database, make sure you ask, can I customize my own fields? And if they say yes, ask them to show you and ask them to show you where. So they might pull up an example and say, oh, yeah, look, in the donor profile, you can add that a box for an alumni. You can add their favorite color, ice cream flavor. Fantastic. Where else can I add customizable fields? Because sometimes when you're shopping for a database, of course, there are salespeople, right? Like shopping for a car. They're going to show you all the bells and whistles, right? That come top of mind. But you want to make sure you ask the deeper questions because you want to make sure that whatever you're able to customize actually fits what you need for your department and organization. So can you go into the database and take this exact image and say, can I go in and create a donor life cycle for each of my donors in a drop-down box? So after I have a coffee with someone, or after, maybe I've closed a gift, I can go in my drop-down, select closed. Or if I'm stewarding someone, can I go there and say, oh, they're in the stewardship phase, and have them show you where you can do that and make them show you an example. Yes is not enough, okay? Yes is not enough because by the time you're paying $3,000 a month for that database and it can't do what you need it to do and you're stuck in a 3-year contract, it's too late. Okay? It is too late. So make sure you're asking deep questions. Figure out what it is that you want to do and what you need to do for your team before you even go on the market to look for that database. Have your questions ready. Okay? And if you're having a difficult time figuring out what questions to ask, Picture your team meeting or your department meeting. What questions come up? What are the things that you guys focus on? Take a look at the agenda, right? I bet most of these in any development meeting will come up. Take a look at how you talk about the donor process, how you talk about the stewardship process and the process within and across teams, which we'll get into in a second. And that will guide you towards what you need to ask for when you're shopping for your database. Okay. I copied and pasted this PDF. It's apologies, it's a little blurry from a client that we worked with last year. And they just wanted a really simple, look, we're talking a team of six, really simple, basic donor communications calendar. And this is just an excerpt from that. Okay. Um, and the recommendation at the time, and I think their development team had maybe two or three people. The recommendation at the time was to front load the top of your month. So week one of the month, these are the things that we're doing. We're doing the monthly e-newsletter. We're sending out the lapse donor letter. That way you have the next 3 weeks, right, to see who's engaging with your content, who's looking at the impact reports. You have the next 3 weeks to say, you know what, let me set up a coffee with this donor. Let's go out to lunch, right? Again, all depending on gift size and relationships that need to be built. Week two, then we're focusing on major donor outreach. Week three, social media story series. Now, this social media story series, FYI, for week three is for next month. Okay. So, what you're looking at in April as a social media story series is for May. Again, this is sort of a truncated version, so we could fit it on the slide, but there is a operational manual for what this communication needs to look like. And I know that sounds like it's 18 pages, but it was 2.5 pages long. It was a team of six, development team of two. So we wanted to make sure that things were simple and that they fit what the team could do and that it was a plan that the team could execute consistently, right? Because often that becomes the bottleneck. We have a beautiful plan. We did it month one and month two. Oh, but some things happened month three and four, and we were only able to do XYZ. Even if it's one or two things that you're doing in terms of stewardship per month, per quarter, just make sure you do it well at a level of excellence and that you're doing it consistently. Okay. Now, at the heart of donor communications is stewardship, is it not? At the heart of donor communications is stewardship. Because what is stewardship in essence? It's non-transactional touch points. Okay. If somebody makes a donation and you mail a letter to their home saying, thank you for your donation of $500, that's not stewardship. Okay. That is a tax letter that you are sending, right, out of your logistical care to make sure that they have what they need and to say thank you. Yes. But we want to make sure stewardship is not tied to the dollar amount. So when you're stewarding, in effect, I'm not saying if you take someone out to coffee, you're not going to say, oh, by the way, thank you for your $500 gift, right? You're not going to ignore it, but it's not the basis and the foundation for that interaction. So let's take a look at this is an actual stewardship calendar we created for an organization. This was a much larger organization. They had a full staff of 62, a budget of 11 million, one of our kind of outlier budgeted organizations. So they were able to carry out 16 steps, right, for their schedule of interactions. And I call it a schedule of interactions because within the grand scheme of those interactions, stewardship takes place, right? We see stewardship as like the siloed activity or behavior that we do with and or for our donors, but it really is part of the larger picture, okay, of interactions with your donor. And as you can see here, what we're going to focus on for the purposes of this conversation is phase two. That's the stewardship phase. Okay. That is phase two. Now, there are particular behaviors and moments that I think do warrant a thank you so much for your gift of. And I would put it in the stewardship phase. Okay. And oftentimes It's those donors that might have gone above and beyond, right? Not only did they give a gift of whatever it is, 500 bucks, but you know what? They showed up and they volunteered at your program. Okay. Or they gave a gift of $10. And their way of giving back to your organization is by volunteering at 4 events throughout the year. Or their way of giving back was connecting you to their employer, Wells Fargo, because they know Wells Fargo has a grant you qualify for, and they would love to be at the table to help you get that grant. So we have to look at stewardship. It's just not black and white. Stewardship is not black and white. How you're building relationships with your donors is not black and white. And that's why I tell folks I tend to veer away from, I'm a bit of a nonprofit rebel, quite frankly, but I tend to veer away from the you have to say thank you 8 times a year. No, I don't. I would be so annoyed if someone said thank you 8 times a year for the same gift, right? It's not black and white. It's maybe how you're saying thank you, how you're positioning yourself, to invite others into that relationship with the donor. So, looking at, for example, phase two here, right? Steps 5 through 11. So, maybe it is getting a phone call from the board chair or board member, right? Maybe it's getting a call from a volunteer. Maybe it's getting a call from the mom who was so moved by what this organization has done for her child through music or the arts, through literacy, and she wants to volunteer time on a Saturday, or she's willing to make a few phone calls. Of course, keeping donor data integrity and security, right, optimal still. We can't ignore those things and just go off of emotion here. But just think about it. It's donor stewardship and building those donor relationships. I just wanted to get the point across that it's not black and white. What can be black and white are the words and the plans you have on paper. But you have the plan so that you know when to pivot. Okay. You have the plan so you know when to pivot, not necessarily to follow it to a T or else. Okay. That's not the culture you want to build in your nonprofit if you're a leader and if you're running a development team. That's not the culture you want to build. You follow this plan or else. It really is the plan, and it's picking out and digesting and really truncating it down to the things that we can do well, and that we can do consistently. Okay. And you'll get this too once this is emailed to you. I don't see any questions in the chat, but please feel free to drop them in. I know this is a lot of information, and this is sort of the second level. Last week was sort of level one. This is level two, right? Going a notch down deeper. And the class will really be where we're walking out with tangible things you can take into your organizations and use. So let's get into organizational alignment. I think we're doing pretty good on time, Yinting. Um, what is it? We use the word all the time. It's almost become a buzzword. Organizational alignment is making sure that everyone in your org is rowing in the same direction. That is all it is in a nutshell. Are we rowing in the same direction? Are we making these decisions based off of what we believe is best for the mission? What is best for the mission? Has leadership shared that with us transparently, right? Those business goals, are we in alignment with the same business goals? Are we even working towards the same strategic plan? Have we even all read the strategic plan? I mean, there are so many different layers, right, to make sure that your folks are aligned. And let me say this, if you're thinking right now, oh gosh, the dreaded strategic plan, we have one, we don't use it, or we need one, we don't have enough money to hire someone to do it, we don't know where to start. Start with a page. Start with a page, a one-page strategy. And all it is strategy is just prioritizing, right? What are we prioritizing? Pick three things you need to prioritize. Three things you need to prioritize. Then list how you're going to prioritize them, who needs to be involved in the prioritization, and what resources you need to prioritize them. Okay. Once you have that, then you simply list by when. By when do these things need to be done? Right? I mean, we go into goal setting and setting the SMART goals and KPIs and all of that. But in essence, that's what strategic planning is. What are our priorities? what needs to be done? How does it need to be done? What resources do we need? Right? Financial, human capital resources, maybe it's time, right? And then listing your goals and when these things need to be accomplished by. We tend to overcomplicate it and spend 8 to 12. I was with a nonprofit who spent 2 years on a strategy. My God, 2 years on the strategy, right? While all of these things are falling through the cracks. I don't know any nonprofit who could operate optimally by spending 2 years. Okay, fine. It was 22 months. Close enough, right? 2 years on a strategy. So I'm thinking about it and a very simple and simplifying it will help. So what does it look like when um, team alignment or organizational alignment is operationalized? What does that look like actually? Well, what it looks like is that the mission and vision drive every department's work. There's no egos involved, okay? The mission and vision drive every department's work. But what does that require? That requires that we're in alignment about what the mission and vision is, but it also requires that we are surrounding ourselves around a shared vision, right? Around a shared vision. It looks like a cohesive strategy that connects all of your departments. That's where your business goals come in, right? And we say KPIs all the time, but I prefer the term business goals, which KPIs are a part of, but your business goals will drive that cohesive strategy. The program team needs to know what the development team's goals are, and vice versa. Development needs to know what the operations team's goals are and what finance team's goals are. What does leadership have planned, right? All this needs to come together in a cohesive strategy. It looks like staff understanding how their particular roles contribute to the big picture, no matter the level. Okay, this is not a leadership ego trip when we're talking about organizational alignment. Everyone is part of the organization, so everyone needs to understand how important their role is to the bigger picture. The goals and decisions are made, again, based on mission-driven priorities. Okay. And that is where focusing in on three larger organizations, may have five areas that they're looking at, or what I call 5 pillars within their strategic plan. But if you can't tie your activity back to your strategy, to one of your 3 priorities, if you can't tie that activity back towards a priority, the activity need not be done. This is one of the hardest things, to say no. And this goes for any activity. It goes for the person who emailed you last week and said, "Oh my gosh, Fifth Third has a grant application that, is due in 3 days. You guys should totally apply for it." And that email might have came from a donor or a board member, right? They send it to you a week prior. If that grant application is really not going to drive, or even worse, it takes away from what you had planned for the next week that is driving your mission forward, you're going to have to say no and put it aside. We do an entire grants writing workshop, and let me tell you, the hardest thing when we got that survey back for organizations was saying no when a grant opportunity came to them. Okay. One of my favorite authors, Keith Cunningham, would call it a kitten scratching at your front door. You can't respond to every kitten scratching at your front door. You just can't. Okay. So the goals and decisions have to be mission driven. They have to be tied to your mission driven priorities. And we need our leadership to lead by example in making that happen and not saying, "Oh, I found a grant application. Can you apply for it by tomorrow night or over the weekend?" Right? Internal communication is clear, it's consistent, and it reduces confusion and silos. Okay. So this is what organizational alignment looks like. There is not, we have about 10 minutes left, and I'm pretty sure we'll get through this, but when I think about decisions and decision making, across nonprofits, across any organization, but I work with nonprofits, so we'll stick there. Goals and decisions. When we think about decision making, that is it can become an area of contention among leaders, among teams. Well, who decides that we need the grant or not? And God forbid you have a organizational leader who doesn't empower their departmental leaders, then you're in for a real conundrum, right? So when it's time to make those critical decisions, and for me, a critical decision is, hey, we're applying, for a grant, and it's going to require us to have the program team at the table. It's going to require operations and finance, as most grants do, right? Making sure you're using a decision-making model and that decision-making model is respected. And there are several out there. I'm sure many of you have heard of the decision-making tree. You have the MOCA, you have Rapid. Rapid is one of my favorite ones. But making sure there was somebody driving that decision-making and that there is one person at the end who is actually in charge of making that decision. And what it does when you create that document where you say, okay, we're using Rapid, I'm going to be recommending this decision. Okay. And you fill in all the other places, make sure that you have specific names of who needs to be at the table for each of those areas as you go through the decision-making process. It reduces friction, it reduces contention, and it just makes for a more organized process. Doesn't keep everybody happy every time, but at least the process is clear from the onset and folks know what to expect. And decision making is being made in transparency and not in a silo or behind closed doors. Okay. If you have time to look that up, it's rapid decision making, created by Bain and Company. All right. Organizational alignment. I mean, you guys have seen probably a ton of these, right? And last week I shared a chart. It was kind of departments in different little boxes of different sizes. But this in itself looks a little messy, right? And organizational alignment, before it can get to a point where you are fully aligned, it is a little bit messy, especially if you're in a place where you're trying to figure things out, or folks are doing other people's jobs or wearing multiple hats in our small nonprofit shops. And that's okay. That's okay for now, right? It's okay for now. We just need to be real about where we're starting and where we need to go. And if you are in the process of creating that strategic plan, and let's just say, you have your three pillars, and under one of those pillars is operations. And under operations, it's shop for new database, right? Transition to new database. Maybe that is one of your key goals under that pillar. But at least everyone will come around knowing, hey, we're in the market for a new database. Fantastic. Now we're going to come around the table and figure out, how is this new database going to enable the development department to do its work? How is it going to enable marketing, HR, finance? Do we need to get a database where the finance team, and a lot of nonprofits have external finance consultants that they work with, right? Just to mitigate costs, and HR as well. But do we need a database that will allow the finance team to log in and pull the reports they need? Or do we keep operating like we have been and have the DOD, right, or CDO sending finance the reports that they need every single month? Or can finance pull it whenever they want? And by the time the fourth of the month comes, we're already 98% in alignment about what's on that report. Okay. So it looks messy, but I promise you, if you put time and attention towards making sure that that cycle continues and it's focused on programs and mission at the center of it all, it will take time. I'm not going to sit here and say, make a 3-month plan. It'll take time to get to the point where you feel like your team is flowing and the culture is going and we're all, it'll never be ideal. We're all aligned, because right when you get to that point, two people are going to resign, right? And then you're going to have to figure out, okay, how do we kind of realign ourselves? Or the CEO found a new role. So keep in mind, it'll never be perfect, but you just want it to be institutionalized and consistent enough to where if a player needs to go out of the game and replaced with a new player, everyone knows the ropes. Everyone is familiar with what the process needs to be. just a couple of, I mean, you could, you've probably seen 80 of these, right? But organizational alignment is so critical. And these are three of the most, I think, critical areas of organizational alignment that we don't typically think about from a development perspective. But it brings everyone together around a shared goal, right? And it boosts your fundraising because now you have the program person talking to somebody at a donor event, and then that person renews their gift or makes a gift for the first time because the program person or folks are the people with the most with the closest connections to the mission on the ground, right? So they're able to share stories in a way that I think no one else across the organization can because they are on the ground. It makes for stronger grant proposals, right? When you're collaborating and aligning, you have your decision making method ready to go. For grants, I love using the MOCA decision making tool. That's a separate class on decision making, but you can look these up, Rapid and Mocha. And better donor stewardship, like I said before, just in the example I shared, right? Development folks are not the only ones who should be stewarding donors. And I also think program folks are not the only ones who should be talking about programs, right? We should all be in this collaborative environment that allows us to move the mission forward together. Okay. It's not a competition. It's not a finger point, and it certainly should never be silos. There's no way a nonprofit can run effectively if they are siloed. Oh my goodness, we got through it and we have 2 minutes left for questions. That's awesome. But just a quick reminder before we even get into that, the 2-day fundraising class. Okay, we have a few folks already registered. Registrations just opened up at midnight. If you have any other questions aside from what you see there on the registration page, please feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, shoot me a DM. So let's get to some of the questions we might have here. Let's see. Susan, we use Salesforce. I'm not aware of a way to create a donor lifecycle with this program. Are you aware of an option to do this in Salesforce? Susan, are you using Salesforce Nonprofit Success Pack? I'm going to ask you that question and then I'm going to answer it. I know because we're coming on time. But yes, actually, Salesforce is the first database that I use that allowed me to do the donor life cycle. And when we had to downgrade for a nonprofit, we were thinking about other potential um, systems that would allow us to do something similar. Neon came very close because we were able to simply create a drop down. But yes, as a matter of fact, Susan, when I used Salesforce for those few years, we were able to put in the percentage of the confidence percentage of what gifts we thought would come in at the end of the year. So if I met with a donor, that's at zero. Of course, we know nothing yet. But once we qualify the donor, we get deeper into the conversation and the donor says, "Oh yeah, I've been coming to your museum for years." Okay, fantastic. That donor goes to like a 10% confidence giving level. And as they move through that donor life cycle, they're assigned a different percentage. So what that allowed us to do, then we would pull out the report every week, every month, as needed. And we would see what donors were in the red and the green and the orange, in the yellow, depending on, they were color coded depending on the percentage of the giving confidence. Okay. And I wonder, Yenting, if Aparo might be able to help with the Salesforce question and the setup of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We do have quite a few Salesforce volunteers now because it's been a popular question. So if you do want to connect with someone just to explore a little bit more about how to make your Salesforce more effective, just let me know and I'll connect you with someone. Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. That's all I have, Yenting. I'm going to throw it right back over to you. Thank you so much,
All
everyone.
right. Thank you, Whitney. That was amazing. A lot of great information. Like I said, I will send a follow-up email. It'll include the link to this recording. It'll have the slide deck as well as the database comparison. Any other resources that we come across, I'll share that with you. It'll be both the first session and the second session as well. That is it for today. I did drop in the chat for our May webinars, so feel free to sign up for those. Again, Whitney, shout out to you. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Yancing, for having me again.